The November 13th meeting of the Durham Planning Board shall come to order. Roll call, we'll start over here today.
Robert Sullivan.
Sally Tobias.
Paul Rasmussen.
Michael Barron, town planner. And I locked my keys in my office today, so I'm missing some documents. So I'll be a little slower on the uptake tonight.
Peyton McManus.
Kick that door on.
Heather Grant.
Richard Kelly.
Erica Namagaya.
All right, let's see, we still have an open spot. Tom's not here. Erica, you are in the full-time spot that's vacant.
Sounds good.
And until Emma arrives, Heather, you're our council rep.
Okay.
Approval of the agenda. I would like to move, because we have a speaker here, item 13 up one to item, and to basically switch the order for items 12 and 13. Here's M. Welcome, Ms. Friedrichs. That's all I have. Anybody have anything they want to add? All right.
I'll second that motion.
I wasn't actually making a motion. I was just saying what I'd like to do with the agenda, the alterations I'd like to make to the agenda. So we'll approve the motion to approve the agenda as I suggested.
Second.
Second by Peyton. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
So that was first by you.
That was first by me.
All right, just want to make sure I got that right. Approval of the agenda.
Town planners report.
So in case anybody's watching, but they probably got the word, 3 items were taken off the agenda tonight. Item 9, the public hearing for 4 Riverview Court is postponed to December 11th. The application was presented to the Conservation Commission for their recommendations, and we all realize that more information is needed, so the applicant's going to be hiring a professional, I think Robbie Woodburn, landscape architect, to delineate some more parts of the plan. It'll be brought back to the Conservation Commission on November 25th, and then will be coming for the public hearing to you on December 11th. And then we had, by some coincidence, I suppose, 2 items on the agenda that we've never really had before. Individual houses located on a scenic road where the property owner wanted to remove some trees in the right-of-way and to move or rebuild the stone wall. And we interpreted the scenic road statute and our local designation that they would need to come to the planning board for that approval. The statute's a little bit vague, but we interpreted it in a little more, stricter way. One of the property owners questioned that. We did some research and we talked to the town attorney, and she determined that for an individual property on an older collector road, you probably know this, within the road right-of-way, the abutting property owner actually owns the land within the right-of-way. So, for example, when we do a new subdivision, Riverview Court, what have you, the developer will prepare a deed and they will actually convey all of the land in the right-of-way to the town of Durham. So we own it, we maintain it, etc. But on older collector roads, those more than 100 years old, which is all 5 of our scenic roads, those are just old ways, and they were never conveyed to the municipality. So we have what's called a viatic easement to maintain them, to run the roads for the public use, to put drainage in there, to do whatever we need to do to maintain them, but we actually do not own the land. So nonetheless, we thought that would still be subject to the scenic designation, but the town attorney confirmed that because the abutting property owner actually owns the land and they have the right to cut those trees without town approval. Now, in terms of relocating a stone wall, she interpreted the statute that actually is the town staff that can approve a request to move a stone wall a little, rebuild it, adjust it, et cetera. So one of those projects, I approved their plans for the stone wall at 561 Bay Road. And at 361 Durham Point Road, the applicant removed the stone wall along Durham Point Road because they were blasting for the house, which is very close. They've stockpiled the stones, and they will be rebuilding the wall in place. So we will coordinate with them. They are required to do that. We'll make sure that that is done. So those three items, item 9, 4 Riverview Court, item 10, 361 Durham Point Road, and item 11, 561 Durham Point Road, that's actually 561 Bay Road, are not on the agenda. And then just lastly, we are meeting in 1 week on November 20th. We are looking at a condo conversion for a duplex on Young Drive, a public hearing for an amendment to the site regulations regarding parking, a public hearing on the definitions, and continuing discussion on the PUD. Although we're also talking about the PUD tonight, so we'll see if you want to continue that for next week. And that's it.
I have a question about the public hearing on the site plan updates. Is there any, maybe it's too late notice at this point, but why are we not maybe trying to combine the other site plan updates that we talked about doing into one and getting this kind of out the door? And also, is there any reason to consider, as we've done with the workforce housing overlay district, reducing the parking minimum to one space per unit, which would go a little above and beyond the state requirements? But I mean, I think that a developer who feels the need to include more parking than that will include more parking, but it gives somebody more flexibility, as we kind of discussed.
What item are you talking about?
I'm asking about the public hearing.
For November 20th.
For
on
next
the site
week.
regs.
Okay.
Well, that's a good question. When the planning board does an amendment to the site plan regulations or the subdivision regulations, most of the time you really just do one item that has arisen, or maybe a couple related items. Other times you package a bunch of things together. Could be done either way. But this arose because the state had passed a law last year that we had to come into compliance with. So there's a couple of site plan regulations that have kind of been hanging around. I've got a record. We could bring those forward to an upcoming meeting.
But at this point, it wouldn't be practical because it's already posted for public hearing?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
That answers the question.
that answers
Thank
the
you.
question.
Yeah.
I think if it's simple and like the correction for the childcare locations and things like that, it'll go through faster, and then that takes care of, kind of an important item, in my opinion. Other items, I think you're right, as an example, would be better to package more.
Would we want to discuss before it goes to public hearing, further reducing the minimum parking requirement for site plan regulations, kind of along the lines of what we've been doing, our draft for the workforce housing, down to maybe one parking spot per unit?
I would have
For-
no problem with that.
I'm inclined.
You mean in
That
general
makes sense
for
to me.
for all site plans, or for
For all site plans?
for one of the other things that's currently on our table?
For all site plans, just the general site plan reg, have it be one parking spot as the minimum, but then if the developer wants to do more, they do more.
I think things move a lot faster with the smaller the package we can keep. So I'm, like I say, I wouldn't mind putting two small ones out every month as opposed to trying to get one big one out in a year. So if we got stuff that's, we think we can move quickly on, I would be in favor of that in the future.
Well, we could put that on, say for December 11th for you to consider and see if there's any other minor site regs to put on there.
But for the public hearing next week, we couldn't float
No.
the idea out there as it being a one parking spot minimum.
No.
No.
Okay, that was my question.
We probably should discuss.
We would have to pull it back,
Yeah.
create the new draft, and then repost it.
Okay.
All right, any other questions for Michael?
Oh, the workforce housing ordinance, I'm assuming people are fairly up to date with what the council's been doing with it. But they actually had discussions with Paul and I at 2 meetings after it came to them. And they've now posted it for public hearing this coming Monday, November 18th. So what's posted is the same as the planning board initiated. The council's talked about a half a dozen changes. And I'm anticipating after the hearing, the council will probably want to look at a number of changes. They'll probably incorporate them, and then if they're significant, which good chance they will be, it will come back to you again to look at a revised draft, and then you would have another public hearing, and then it would go back to the council. But we're making progress.
Doesn't feel like it.
Have the recommendations been consolidated somewhere? Maybe I missed that.
They have no recommendations yet.
Or comments, have they been consolidated?
Their comments, you could find some of the comments in, if you want to.
In the discussions?
In the discussions, and I think maybe in some of the town council packet.
And there's a draft, I'm pretty sure we put another version of the document on our website for the planning board on this item, it's near the top, which includes things that council talked about at their first meeting. At any rate, I'll let you know if and when the council wants to make a number of adjustments to it. And almost certainly they would be significant, so it would come back to you. But the things we had talked about, when I say significant, all that means is it's too much to just adopt it without having another hearing and come back to the board. The things that they've talked about are not huge, but we'll see what happens after the hearing.
To provide a little more context, I mean, so far I think it's mainly been questions that the town council has had that they didn't feel like they could understand just by reading the draft of the ordinance and the FAQs, although they did find the FAQs helpful.
Yeah.
Councilor Bubar sent some more detailed comments about the draft. Some questions, for example, about how things would actually work out if you were to do, for example, a subdivision of an existing lot and wanted to keep part of it for the current owner of the lot and develop the rest as workforce housing. That was one question. There are questions about ownership, and again, kind of wondering why ownership is excluded. There were questions about different elements. I think also the conservation for percentage being reserved for conservation. I pulled up my notes to see if I
Yeah, I
took
watched it, so
Okay.
you covered them pretty good, and I just was curious if it had all been compiled somehow.
And just to comment on that, I will say that, we had, I think, 2 public hearings, and depending on almost which group showed up, it was radically different. And so I'm not sure, I guess that sort of makes a difference, I think, in terms of what's being vocalized. And on the second hearing, I think there were more people, and I think there was a lot more support that was, articulated. And so I guess it's the question of how do you, it's short notice, I think, but how do you turn out people that really care about this on both sides to get their opinions across? I'm not sure. Sort of the effort that was made to get everyone out for the second hearing, but I found it very useful. And so I guess that effort's probably underway, but.
I mean, I alert the usual customers. I don't go really out of my way to reach out to people one way or another, but I try to let everybody know. It'll be in Friday updates. It's posted. I did my typical mass email, but yeah.
It's really up to word of mouth.
Right.
And keep in mind, board members, planning board, housing task force, anybody, you can certainly speak at a council public hearing if you wish. Of course, you just introduce yourself, say you're a member of the planning board, and you're speaking for yourself, not for the board. But you're certainly welcome to do that if you wish.
All right. So, town council report?
We continued discussion of the workforce overlay district. We also had an update on the climate action plan from our UNH sustainability intern. That was quite interesting. We're looking at kind of a 30% emissions projected path reduction by 2030, which is, 50% is what is being asked of us to get kind of the best scenario climate change, but it's 30% is equivalent to about a 1.15 degree warming scenario. Sophie is continuing to stay with us, our current sustainability intern, and is looking at getting a little bit more into the minutia of some of Durham's actions, like, if we do a compost program or how the swap shop might contribute, although we also don't get into consumption. So our carbon emissions don't consider what we buy outside of Durham and what, the climate pollution generated from that. It's a really interesting update, and look forward to hearing more about that plan. As a little FYI, she was assuming kind of a 5% electrification turnover from fossil fuels. So our two biggest contributors are transportation and built environment. So she was assuming about a 5% switch over each year from fossil fuel heating, essentially, to electrification. And kind of conservative estimates for that, but looking to kind of build on that momentum with the available tax credits, and also, with the work of the Energy Committee, and just seeing that the market's kind of shifting that way more. Let's see, roundtable. All right. Hold on. Oh gosh, I lost that page. That one is. There we are. Okay. And then we also approved November 30th, 2024 is Small Business Saturday. That's the Saturday following Thanksgiving, which is a tradition we've kept in Durham. And then we had a presentation of the audit report. We adopted the amended solid waste ordinance. And we adopted the, we set the public hearing for the first reading on the zoning ordinances. Oh, sorry, no, this was the Workforce Housing Overlay District.
But
Okay.
and the general amendments.
And the general amendments, we set the public hearing for that for Monday, November 18th, so this coming Monday. So that we have moved up to public hearing with both of those. And then we started looking, got an introduction to the budget for this year from Administrator Selig. And those are the highlights.
Thank you. Other committees? Richard?
Yeah, so let's see. Got my notes here somewhere. Sorry. Okay, so the Conservation Commission. They met on October 28th. And I thought the real highlight there was we had a guest. Ellen Snyder is the chair of the Newmarket Conservation Commission. And she's put her hand out to work with the Durham Concom with a variety of things. One of the things that they're working on is they're looking to do their, update their prime wetland mapping. And this is something Mark West would be performing for them, as well as they're looking to do vernal pools as well. And they're looking to explore possible grant opportunities, combine Durham and Newmarket to do something along those lines. Mark your calendars, Turtle Fest is May 10th, 2025. So it sounded like it was a really exciting thing. Enjoyed that. Jackson Lab was in front of us as a courtesy, similar to what they do here when they're doing a development. They have a reconfiguration of their existing dock structure. The 4 Riverview was in front of the Concom as well. And as Michael said, the materials really weren't ready for prime time. And that was very clear to myself, certainly, right from the get-go. And so back to the drawing board there, and as Michael said, on 11/25, they'll be back in front of the Concom and then in front of us December 11th. And then continued work on wetland shoreland overlay district, and there was just a little talk about the plant species in site regulations. And that's all I had. Am I missing something there, Michael?
Yeah, covered pretty well.
All right. Turtle Fest, May 10th.
Get there fast, take it slow.
ticket.
Yeah.
What's involved with that?
It's just, celebrating the turtles. It's their nesting season, I believe. So it's a
Awareness.
reminder to be careful.
Crossing the roads.
They cross the road.
Yeah, they're crossing the roads a lot. and-
Especially Durham Point,
Yeah, so.
when you go into the
Do
transfer
we actually do
station.
anything downtown or?
No.
No,
No,
No.
unless you
All right.
organize them.
this is over.
IMAC committee had a meeting on the 30th. They're in the middle of doing their compost challenge, which they're excited about. And their next big thing they're looking at is having an activity at Hannaford with the goal of doing outreach to try to reduce the use of plastic bags for people coming in and using plastic bags. So they're looking at some possibilities for ways to get people excited about that. Yeah, that's most of it.
The Energy Committee did not meet last week because of the election. It was election night. So we're meeting again in December. But related to that, I was able to attend the local energy solution conference, which is put on by Clean Energy New Hampshire, as a Durham rep along with Charlie Forsey. And they did have a session there about energy and housing, which was one of the ones that I attended. And that was a very cool session. They talked a lot about different affordable housing projects in the overlay with energy, because utility costs are part of housing costs, and they're defined that way at the state level. So we heard about community solar projects being put in the resident-owned communities. That's manufactured housing, where the land is community-owned, and that's a program in New Hampshire that has helped make manufactured housing very affordable, is by helping these communities buy up the land on which their manufactured homes sit on. And it's a model that has been received a lot of praise nationally, and so it's been copied and kind of made into a national program. So they're rolling out now community solar projects for those same communities. So where they would have a community solar array that the residents share, in addition to the land that is cooperatively owned, to help those residents keep their housing costs affordable by making the electrical more affordable. And they also shared examples of affordable housing that have been built across the state that was either net zero or passive house. So they have several examples of that. And then other than the housing session, which really focused on the overlap between affordability and energy concerns, there were general conversations around utility reform, around moving to a distributed grid where a lot of electricity is generated locally through things like solar is the predominant one in New Hampshire right now, but down the road, it could be wood fuel plants. There's conversation among some legislatures about trying to get small nuclear plants going and some grid privatization. Some laws will be put forth about that. And a general expectation that transmission costs will continue to increase, which is on the electric bill. One half is kind of the generation of the electric source, and the other half is the transmission, which is moving electricity from wherever it's generated to your home. And that's the part that the utility companies actually own. So Eversource really only controls the cost on the transmission side, but they're continuing to project increases and actually have already announced an increase for 2025, August 2025. Those costs will go up again. So there was conversation around why that is, but it's already out there that will be happening. And one of the ways to kind of protect yourself against that is to have more energy being produced locally. And right now that's mainly through solar in New Hampshire, but it could include any sort of energy source that's produced locally. And that was the...
Any other committees? All right. Public comments? If you have any general comments for the board? Do we have anyone to Zoom?
No hands up.
All right. Do we have an audience in Zoom?
Just Eric.
Very good. That will bring us up to item 8 then. It's a public hearing for 65 Durham Point Road, 2-lot subdivision adjustment of right-of-way line. Former owners of the subject lot made an agreement with the town of Durham in 1985 for the town to relocate a portion of Durham Point Road onto the subject lot in order to remove a tight bend in the road. The land underlying the newly located road was never conveyed to the town, nor was the right-of-way line moved. A new plot has been created to correct that omission. Sarah Ford, trust property owner, map 115, lot 6, in the Residence Coastal District. All right, so Sarah presented this to us last week. Do we want to hear from her again before we open the public hearing? No? All right.
I think you probably heard from Val.
Or Val.
Sheldon, the realtor
Right.
representing the seller.
Yeah,
at the
right,
last
Val,
meeting.
sorry. Right, all right, then shall we open the public hearing?
I move that we open the public hearing.
Second.
Seconded, so first by Erica, second by Richard. All right, if anyone would like to speak on this item, you approach the podium. Any hands up in Zoom?
Nope.
Mr. Chairman, there being no members of the public wishing to speak on this matter tonight, I move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. The notice of decision, does anybody have any issues with the notice of decision?
I would just suggest that the language, forgetting which precedent condition, I don't have it with me, regarding the plat, thank you. I suggest simply that the condition, under precedent condition notarized deed, that we just include there, the applicant will finalize the deed and the plat in coordination with the town attorney and have it notarized. We've been going back and forth a little. We've never done this before. It's a little unusual, so we just have to finalize some of the language there. But it should be fine.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the 2-lot subdivision adjustment of right-of-way 65 Durham Point Road. The Sarah Ford Trust, property owner. This is map 115, lot 6 in the Residence Coastal District.
Second?
Seconded by Erica. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right. All right, according to the amended agenda, we are now moving to item 13. Draft ordinance regarding student rental 3 unrelated rule and habitable floor area. Discussion about prospective ordinance prepared by an ad hoc group working with the town administrator. And to provide a little bit of background on this is one of our state representatives, Alan Howland.
Hi, I'm Al Holland. I represent Stratford 20, so you're just one of my 4 towns. It's Durham, Lee, Madbury, and Dover Ward 4. Excuse me. And I also sit on the Municipal County Government Committee in the New Hampshire House, which tends to deal with zoning. And so last session, House Bill 1281 came before us. It was introduced by the Vice Chair of the committee, Representative Power. And it set a occupancy floor. You could have no less than 2 occupants per bedroom was the bill. And it was definitely aimed at Durham. It was aimed at taking down the 3 unrelated occupant rule that had been in place, I think, since 1986. And so it came in January before our committee. I think it was not till March that we actually had the executive session on it. The committee ruled 12-6 that it was inexpedient to legislate. It was tabled at the House, and you know what's amazing is bills that you think are dead do eventually come back alive. It's like resurrection. And so what happened is the Senate had a bill, and they took the language from 1281 and pasted it onto the Senate bill, bypassed the Municipal County Government Committee and sent it to the Special Housing Committee. The intent really was that they thought, well, I'm not supposed to say intent, but I think that really was to try to circumvent, particularly people who had a lot of zoning experience. It went before the full House again. They had made an amendment that really kind of blew up Hanover's zoning as well. And so a cobbled coalition of us got together and tabled it by 4 votes, and the bill died. But I thought most of our committee, the municipal county, and myself included, thought there really was some need to re-examine the 3 unrelated rule. I think while the intent was good to try to put student housing where it belonged and maybe not where it didn't belong, it was too broad. And when you think about it, for example, if you had 4 nurses, they're unrelated, they would not be able to rent a single family home in these areas where we had the 3 unrelated. So it just didn't work. While the intent was good, it needed to be refined. And so a group of us got together, and so the thought process really was, when we talked about it, because I've heard over and over again when you talk about students, it's always the nuisance that comes up. And so nuisances themselves can be addressed by RSA 162, which is the nuisance ordinances. And so if it's a nuisance that you're worried about, then you're supposed to use the nuisance ordinance to address them. But actually, as we talked about it more, and Audrey, our code enforcement, talked about it, and also as we talked to legal counsel about it, it wasn't the nuisance per se. It really is that students have a different lifestyle than old people. And I can say that I have students, and they just have a different time frame than we do. And so as a result, the student housing doesn't work particularly well in residential areas, is what we found. And so the question is, how could you provide areas for student housing that really work for them, that provided safe areas that we could show as a town that we had provided enough access to student housing to meet it, but then not allow it in areas where it didn't fit. And I think the other thing that I've seen over the last at least 7 years that I've worked in zoning in Durham is that despite the fact that we built 2,000 new units of student housing, and we can amply show that there's enough student housing, particularly as the university has gone to a 2-year requirement, it's the fear of student housing being built that prevents you from building missing middle housing. And so when we did the RKG report and we looked at Durham's housing market, it really bifurcates. We have a lot of student housing and we have a lot of single-family housing, but we don't have anything in the middle. And so every time you bring up anything, whether it be building a duplex, fourplex, the first thing that always comes up is how do we prevent it from being student housing? And so it has really prevented us from providing the housing that we definitely need. And so we sat down and talked, and the question is, how do you solve that problem? And so when you look in fire code, when you hit chapter 26 of the fire code, so when you get 5 unrelated people that are sitting in one dwelling and they are sharing a kitchen, by definition they're pretty transient in terms of turning over year to year, that actually is defined as a lodging house. And all new lodging houses that meet that requirement must have a sprinkler system. That triggers the sprinkler system requirement. And so what we said is, okay, let's think about that. That gives us an opening on how to define student housing. What we said is, at the point that you hit that 5 unrelated threshold, and if those 5 happen to be by federal regulation considered a full-time student, then that unit's use and definition is a student rental. And the town therefore had the right to say where you could put that student rental, not saying no, you can't have student rentals, but these are the areas that are really appropriate for student rentals, allowing the student rentals there, and then being able to show that we had enough to meet student demand. And so that really hit some traction the first meeting we have. The second meeting we came around, and of course it's always the wonder of wordsmithing as you get into like this. And so it really came down to what the definition of a student rental would be. Our hope, and what I'd heard in the legislature, a lot of concern was using family to define occupancy, just because it's not 1950 anymore, and it's really complex when you try to define family in 2024. And so when we looked at this, we thought better to actually define what a student rental is by students. And so the definition we came up with, a student rental is a residential dwelling composed of 1 or more dwelling units on a single parcel that contains more than 5 undergraduate college students. Total among the units as defined by federal law. And so that doesn't mean a multi-family unit that, if you cut up a fourplex, it would be the 5 unrelated and sitting in each unit of the fourplex, not the fourplex as a whole. The definition we tried to capture in here by putting more than 1 dwelling unit on there, we were trying to address ADUs on there. What we really didn't want to have happen is that the primary residence, the single family home in the ADU was rented by students, and the ADU was rented by students, and so it was a really concentrated lot. By law, you cannot limit occupancy by familiar relationships, so you couldn't say like unrelated in the single family home and ADU, but you could use students because it's not a familiar relationship. And so that we think would work through. And so that was the definition. We think it really captures what student housing really is. In terms of the next step then was like, where would you actually allow these? And that was in the table of uses. And to that, I really kind of relied more on, Audrey has an extremely good knowledge of where student housing is. And we had members of the planning board also on there. And so if you look at the table of uses, and I have to apologize, my eyes are terrible. So the permitted uses where you could have that student rental would fall under the professional office, Churchill, and the courthouse, I believe. Did I miss one? Central Business District.
Central business.
So those places are where student rentals actually predominate, and so that's where student rentals really fit in. And so the other areas that student rentals wouldn't fit in, if you did, so therefore, if you had 5 unrelated in an area that was a non-student rental, yes, you would still have to sprinkle it, but as long as they were not 5 students, it would be allowed. So the hope for that would be is like has not been, or that I can think of ever, anybody saying, hey, if we have a bunch of workforce people renting a unit, we don't want that because it's causing a disturbance. It doesn't happen. The other thing that's probably more unlikely is you get older than a college student, it's harder to get 5 people to want to live in one unit. And so it gives an opening, I think, for workforce housing outside of the designated student rental zones, but it also allows student rentals to occur in the student rental zone. One of the things that came up during our discussion, of course, is what do you do to grandfathered houses that are in there? Things that are currently falling under the 3 unrelated occupancy, what would happen to them? And so the short answer really would be that those units could go from 3 to 4 unrelated. So theoretically, if you had a rental that right now had 3 students sitting in it, you could go up to 4 anywhere. Again, once you hit 5, that magic number, it could only occur in the student designated zones. And so I think, I don't know if that's super clear or super complex, but it's trying to make it simplified by saying this is what a student rental really is, this is where we allow it, this is where we don't allow student rentals. So I have kind of reached out to members in the House, particularly in the municipal county, both of the ranking members on my caucus, who I think are really knowledgeable in zoning. They liked it. They thought it was really good. And I also reached out to Hanover, a representative for Hanover, and they also liked it. And so the plus side of this, I think, is that ironically enough, some of those grandfathered in units would be able to add another rental. So you're theoretically allowing an increase in student rental in areas. But we're also hopefully allowing the opportunity to build non-student rentals outside of the student rental zones. And I think that was a lot of detail. I see a lot of puzzled looks looking at me. So, I mean, it was kind of quick that we put it together. My hope was that it would, obviously go to you guys, and you have a lot of experience and can toil on it, and that from there it could go to the town council. But unlike the workforce housing, which has taken 11 months, as your representative, I strongly advise you not to work that way on this one. I will have, under current situation, I will have an extremely difficult time defending Durham in the House. And I think if we can go into the next session with this change, it will provide us with a really good rationale to defend ourselves, not only to defend ourselves, but I think also it provides some really good fixes that will improve Durham's housing. So that's it. That's all I got.
So I really appreciate your time. I think I appreciate the explanation, just because when I first read 5 or more, I totally did not get that, because or more in my mind just makes it like unlimited, right? So I don't know if that's something just that we may want to look at.
It goes up, I think, when you look at that. It's a great question, and honestly, we were wordsmithing that to death. We're like, should we say 4? But what it really is when you look at chapter 26 of the fire code, it goes from 4 to 16, I believe, so there is a defined occupancy. The other thing to keep in mind is occupancy is determined by square footage. I think the state fire code says 200 square feet are required per occupant. I believe we're at 3 in Durham. You can tell me that.
Yeah, it was all like crossed out in red.
Yep.
So does that mean that we're changing all this?
So all the
Red
red
go
stuff is
away.
being removed.
Removed, not rewritten.
Removed.
Removed.
Right.
So
The blue is the new.
so when we say 5 or more, it literally means or
Well,
more.
yeah, well,
So
if you
what's
look
the
at
limit?
Madbury Commons, that's or more, right? So, you know, if you don't want to put a cap on it, if you put a cap on it, you know, you have to put a cap that's like really high. Or else it throws out a lot of the stuff we've already put in town.
You're going to have a natural cap anyway because of again, the fire. I mean, I think when in doubt, follow fire code for occupancy because it is a good thing to follow. It gives you reasons. I mean, you begin to kick into certain things like when you hit chapter 26, the 4 to 16, egress becomes written in there. I mean, it's not the highest hurdle to have, but it begins to address what you got to actually do in egress. The real magic one is at 5, when you hit 5, because that means you got to drop in a sprinkler system, which is an investment, at least in the property.
But once you have done the sprinkler system, I mean, it's an interesting exercise to consider, because say that it makes sense for you economically as an owner to do. You might want to do 8 students or 10 students or 12 students in a single family home as opposed to say 5 students to recoup that sprinkler cost. And so the only thing that might limit how many students you could have in that single family home might be our general dimensional standards, which I know this draft gets rid of those. I don't know if there's some other general dimensional standards that might require a certain amount of square footage per occupant, or if we might want to consider keeping some of those in order to say that, like a single family home, you can't put 14 undergraduates there when, because student housing is permitted.
Well, in general, you don't want to put 14 human beings in a house either, really. So that's not even just about students, that's about safety, right? That's
Right.
why, yeah. So there must be some dimensionals, whether we don't name it here but reference it, but it should be somewhere that talks about,
Fire.
Well, it's the 200 square feet per occupant that the fire code has, is your floor.
right. That's what I'm
Right.
just saying.
And just keep in mind that the table of uses is saying, hey, you can't do this in the faculty neighborhood. You can't do more than 5 in the faculty neighborhood.
It's still in
Or
those
5 or
areas where
more.
we already have them. They're still keeping them out of our
Right.
residential.
Well, but even if it's, one of the 4 square houses downtown, might we want to say you can't put 14 undergraduates in that single structure? Because if its fire code is 200 square feet per person, 14 individuals is a 2,800 square foot house. That's, there's plenty of homes that size in Durham, perhaps even in these districts. So I think that's a good point. Right, is there any need to think about the upper limits of those caps? And in which case, maybe we want to modify these general dimensional standards as opposed to eliminating them entirely?
Well, why were they removed? Why were
Because-
they removed in the first place?
Well, if you're not going to, they're all tied to the 3 unrelated rule. So since the 3 unrelated rules going off, then the only reason we would have kept them, all right, and keep in mind, the first section is by zone. So a lot of them get removed simply because it's not permitted in the zone at all. And the next thing was, what do you actually tie them to? So if you're just going to tie them to the student housing definition,
Yeah, I mean, we could put in a minimum floor area per occupant for student
for
housing.
Student housing. I mean, it's
We
reasonable to
could,
think about that.
and this was it was one of the things that we said, it was a question of, do we have another meeting, or we send it to the planning board for the planning board to figure out? And I said, send it to the planning board for the planning board to figure out. Because I was walking out of the room at that point, because I had another meeting to go to.
I mean, it's reasonable to think about if you can give a occupancy square footage, especially for student rental situations. Because there is, from me in this whole thing, my concern is that
Well,
pieces of property will be carved up
Let me-
into tiny units, or tiny bedrooms, and they would just stack them in there, and I think that.
Sally,
the
may I
safety-
break in for just a sec? So we have Alan here as to introduce, so do you have any questions of Alan? And then we can get into our own discussion after that.
Yeah,
Okay.
Richard?
Yes, so starting with that definition,
Yep.
why just undergraduate out?
Well, because graduate students act different than undergraduate students in two ways. First, they don't have the money to pay for like the unit like the undergraduates do, which is really a weird system that that happens with that. And so, actually, the graduate housing, even though we do have a lot of student housing, we don't have enough graduate student housing, is what we're seeing. And it's like, so we were trying to separate them out because they again, the graduate students don't act like the undergraduates. We have ample evidence of that. They fill a bunch of our ADUs and there's never been an issue or a very minimal issue. And so they act differently and they're a need. And so our hope would be that we didn't exclude them. But to your point, you're kind of right. It's very, very unlikely in a single family home that you're going to have 5 graduate students. They don't tend to want to do that. So the hope actually would be somehow either the university or a developer that has a lot of incentive could build graduate student housing and meet that need. And it would be outside of the undergraduates.
So the only reason we put undergraduate in there is because of an actual or perceived difference between those two groups.
It is an actual difference,
Okay.
not perceived. It's like, I mean, clearly the rental works differently, at least the affordability of them. And then the graduate students tend to be older, believe it or not, and I have one of those, and so they just have acted differently in terms of how they're in the neighborhood.
And then when we close that definition, we say as defined by federal law. It's not clear to me what we're defining. Is it undergraduate college students?
Full-time student.
Full-time students?
Full-time students. So that was, we were like, kind of went around and initially we put like 12 credit hours in and we're like, wait a second, before we start defining.
We never, hold on, time out. We never say full-time student in student rentals. So
Okay, so circle
maybe it's
that.
not, strike it.
Circle that, we missed that. So what we were really looking for was a defining a full-time student, I think is what the hope
Okay.
was. So we did not actually, we just as defined by federal law, but I would strongly
put that in
suggest for all of you guys that you pull up the federal law and look through it and see how it works, because it was a little complicated with community college and all that. So we were just looking for some anchor to tie it to that was not this subjective thing. We thought the federal law was probably the best way to go.
I think that's a reasonable anchor.
And that was, I think, my suggestion, and I was thinking of the definition provided from FAFSA, the federal
Yeah.
application for financial student, is it financial student aid? No, there's
Financial aid.
family application for federal student aid, maybe that's what FAFSA stands for. But the point being that that kind of really determines a student's ability to pay. And so if we tie that definition to someone who is able to get financial aid or of some sort, whether loan or scholarship, to assist with housing costs, they're going to school full-time enough to be considered, that they are primarily a student. And I hope maybe Mike will be able to find that definition and reference it exactly, but the point was to look to an outside source for a definition that, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, and it's a definition that has good logic behind it because it does explain some of that financing that we're seeing in terms of how student housing plays out.
And then when you say that speed's sort of of the essence here, are we 6 months out? Are we a year out from having this where what we have right now wouldn't work? What's your take?
2 months.
2 months?
No pressure.
Like in terms of how in terms of how things would work in Concord, is that the time frame we're looking at?
Yeah, my concern, I think that we go back, I think it's just January 8th, but the bills that have been filed will be assigned to committees, and then they'll start to go to public hearing. And I would be much more comfortable if you had something approved before. I have no idea if a bill will be filed that challenged it. I think probably. But I think I would really love or feel more comfortable, and I think you would hopefully ultimately feel more comfortable if we have something in place by the time theoretically it goes to public hearing in mid-January.
That's sooner than I thought.
It's like, it really is kind of quick. I was hoping we would have more time on it. We don't. I mean, there's nothing, I hate to be pushy and force you through stuff, but there will be times, I mean, you can always upgrade and change, but I think this framework or something, as you guys, no pressure, work on it, we can get something that's at least good enough in place that gives you some protection. I don't see anything way out of the box on this right now. I think it is far better than what we have, so sorry.
So, go ahead.
And then the other is the decision to go with 5 rather than 4. And then I think I heard it has to do with fire codes.
It does.
And can you just walk me through that one more time, just why you wouldn't go with 4?
Because when you hit 5, it really triggers the sprinkler system in Chapter 26 of the Fire Code. Right there, it says anything considered a new boarding house requires a sprinkler system. And so what we were saying is in any of these areas, because it would be new when you went to 5, that you would qualify as a new lodging house, and therefore you triggered that fire code sprinkler system, and it really defined you as a lodging house. And so that gave us the opening. Well, if it's defined as a lodging house, we're defining a very specific kind of lodging house. That gave us an opening to say that it's a student rental is the lodging house and where it can be put. So just logically it's defensible in terms of why to do it. Because just that was my initial concern when people were like, well, 3 doesn't work, let's go to 4. And it's like, well, what's the logic behind what your number is? And the logic behind this is clearly 5 triggers a sprinkler system. It triggers a definition of a new lodging house. And therefore, it allows us to define that new lodging house as a specific student rental.
And just my last, so what if you just have 4 students living together? What is that now called?
It is called...
Just 4 students, that's just 4
it
people living together?
It would fall just under your, it doesn't trigger it doesn't trigger the lodging house definition, so it would be a permitted use.
So Al, I get the cap here. If I got a house and I sprinkle it, what's the cap control that prevents a smallish place that had like the control right now is 3 people in it.
Yeah.
that, you know, we've decided as a town, 3 is kind of manageable misdeeds in that place. And misdeeds is defined as walking home late at night and making too much noise, right? That sort of imbalance between the family and
Yep.
the kids. So if I sprinkle a small place, what prevents me from putting a lot of people in it?
Well, so when you, and again, I'm gonna hate to give you guys homework to read it, but you're gonna want to read chapter 26 of the fire code. So it really only, I think, technically a lodging house caps out at 16, which is pretty huge. The more natural cap that you're gonna hit is gonna be square footage by fire code, the 200 square feet. So what would prevent it is you don't have enough square footage. I think also in there, you're gonna wanna check on the egress too, that you make sure, because then you start to hit like primary egress and all that. So you're gonna hit some natural barriers in that small building to kind of cram it to meet fire code. I think from your other perspective, parking is gonna become an issue there too, because you're gonna like start to pack that house with, 16 cars if they fit there. So I think there are some natural caps that'll occur, but I think that's something that you guys are going to have to toil with. But the only thing I would say is if you're going to form a cap, have a good solid rationale why. Why you have that cap. Is it parking? Is it the egress? Is it square footage? And that's tied somewhere to defend your decision. Did that help?
Yes.
Go ahead.
You described this earlier as almost as if there were members of the state legislature that just didn't like what Durham was doing.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, there was a number of different reasons. I think where I said the 4 nursing students, I think that's what really got people. They were like, wait a second, this is like, they thought that they understood the intent of like why you wanted to control student housing, they thought that your tool was too broad and tangled up people that were not students. And so it was just too blunt an instrument, and you needed to come up with a better instrument. Hanover, we've referenced it, you guys looked at family, they tried a different tack than us. But I like this one better, honestly, than Hanover's. But I think all of the communities are kind of struggling with the student housing thing. How do we define it? How do we control it? How do we make sure we have enough of it? Make sure it's safe for our students? So, unfortunately, there has not been a coordinated work doing it with all the college communities. The Senate had a working committee that just started, but it's not getting anywhere. So it's kind of been thrust upon us to figure it out, unfortunately.
I'm sorry.
Well, the message I'd like for you to send back to your peers is that we've got bigger problems that they could be spending their time on than sticking their nose into Durham's business. But I certainly appreciate your efforts.
I will, it is frustrating, I think, because it would be better if we approach student housing in a more statewide, thoughtful way. And it's also been really challenging because UNH's UNH really hasn't been sitting at the table with us. And so we're kind of reacting to student housing, and they're doing stuff on campus and talking and stuff, and it's not really a coordinated effort that we're working on to come up with, I think, the best solution. But I think this is a pretty good starting point, because I think it will hopefully help everybody and clarify things. And it's not, I mean, instead of saying no, we're saying, yes, we are allowing student housing, here's where it is, have at it. And we can show that there's enough. I mean, if they super pack the areas in close where student housing is allowed, theoretically, they're gonna tip the supply and demand market. And if you build too much and you have to drive down prices and undergraduates aren't
Prices
paying as
down.
much for housing, I'm one of those parents paying that tuition. I don't have a problem with that. But I think it provides a good solution for Durham.
And just to your point, some of the sentiment that I see is from families that are outside of Durham and even families in Durham that say it's already the most expensive public state university in the country, and then you layer on exorbitant housing costs associated with that. Do you really have to double us up on that with this rather expensive tuition, and then couple that with housing that's also expensive given, where they are? And families are like, boy, that's a lot for us to bear. I think that's the sentiment that I hear from outside of and sort of around the state.
Again, I think, there's certainly a lot of room for a conversation, a good conversation that we haven't had yet, to figure it out. But, I think this will buy us a little bit of time as we begin to think, because I'm not saying to developers, I definitely don't want to say to developers, please don't build housing. I'm fine with it. I just want to make sure that the kinds of housing that we know we need, and we right now it's almost impossible to build, that we have an opportunity to build that, to fill some other needs in our community besides just undergraduate housing.
And, I'd like to circle back to what Al said about the blunt weapon that the 3 unrelated rule is, because it does it effectively forced out all of our workforce housing. And this method here allows the workforce the housing to potentially come back in because into the areas where we don't allow the student housing.
Yeah, Paul, I think that's a really good point. It's really about behaviors, right? Nobody really cares if it's 4 or 5 people in the house as long as they're well behaved. But when their behaviors are out of line, that's where you need the buffer zone from the families in the late night. And I like the idea that it's almost zoning PO for workforce and affordable housing by doing this. Because all of a sudden everything in PO, which is really the one buffer that still exists, could potentially be developed as workforce and affordable, I think, because we've lifted the cap. But we've kept a little bit of control on it by having the student definition. But I think we got to be really careful on that PO side to see how many bodies can end up in the existing houses, and we don't create nuisance properties along that PO area. CB feels okay, Churchill.
PO is already 80%, 90% student housing.
And
Not everywhere, though.
managed, professionally, most of it's professionally managed student housing, which is different too.
You do have a big development out at Moodward, I believe, don't you?
Orally.
Orally.
Right, it's orally.
Right, it's Orly, it's right there.
So that was discussed, and the thought was leave it out. Let them remain as non-conforming.
They're non-conforming.
You can expand up to 50% as a non-conforming use, but one of the discussions we had was that, our master plan, which is kind of the best document we have for what the interests of the residents of Durham is, because it had over 900 people participating in some way or fashion, so that's a pretty decent representation of Durham. And the master plan kind of focused on, wanting to build up the center of Durham more densely and limit how many vehicles are coming into Durham. And so by putting student housing on the outskirts, what that does is it encourages vehicle use. And it also encourages more development of kind of the more rural parts of town as opposed to pushing towards that density. So that was one of the discussions
I
around
mean, I
that.
hear you, you're going to get West End or,
Yeah,
a
the
possible
West End.
PUD there. You have a very easy corridor, just move students back and forth there. But that can be all dealt with. I guess the most important thing is to get the definition
Yeah.
and then to get it structured in a way that we can then
Yeah.
move these things around.
And, I mean, at least at this time, UNH was only interested in West End as graduate housing, which this is not, include graduate housing. And also, if UNH wanted to build any dormitories, it would not fall under this either. So it's only privately owned because public, state-owned land does not fall under the zoning. So UNH would be able to build, undergrad dorms anywhere that they want. The only thing that would not be able to do is have private developers build undergraduate dorms anywhere.
So Al, just so clarification of, so how this works is presently our main standard is that there's a maximum of 3 unrelated in a dwelling unit, and that applies in all 4 residential zones and I think it's the 5 core commercial zones. I don't have my ordinance with me now, but not in the research industry zones. So with this change, it would remove that, and the new standard would be that student housing would be allowed only in 3 core commercial zones: central business, professional office, and Church Hill.
Courthouse.
Then courthouse.
4.
Oh, I thought that was taken out in the last iteration.
No.
Oh, was that?
Coe's
okay.
Corner was taken out.
Oh, Coast Call, all right, so in
I mean,
the four core areas. And so student housing would be a unit or more than 1 unit in total where there are 5 or more full-time undergraduate college students. So you could have 4 undergraduate students and a graduate student. You could have 4 undergraduate students and a part-time student, 4 undergraduate students and a working person. And that would not meet the definition of student housing, so that would not be restricted. So I wonder how.
I'm just gonna stop you right there. Because we're gonna go through these endless permutations of like this. But in truth, it's pretty unlikely. I'm not gonna say it can't happen because there's always exceptions. But it's unlikely you're going to get a real mix between undergraduate students, graduate students, or non-students. It tends to be undergraduate housing tends to be undergraduate, and then that other hodgepodge falls elsewhere. So while it could happen, I don't think. I mean, is it enforceable? I thought Audrey thought that it's actually this is easier than what we're currently doing. So.
I believe her comment was super easy.
Yeah, so it was like, it seemed to me, and they were like, yes, we like this better. So when we did it, while there are going to always be exceptions to everything, I thought what really was promising was that code enforcement thought it would be better. We were starting to not see a lot of downside in doing this. It seemed to be hitting a lot of the right places where it would theoretically give us more of an opportunity to build out the workforce housing that we know we need. It defined the undergraduate where it would be. And so, yes, there may be, you'll get to a house and like, can I see your transcript or whatever? But Audrey felt that it was easier to do it this way than do 3 unrelated.
All right, anything more for Al? Thank you, Al.
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan.
Good luck.
You too. Another crazy year.
All right, so you heard the spiel. That's why it came to us. We always have given its size, I know we have a ton of things that we're trying to work simultaneously. But I felt that this one was one that we should I should bring to you so that we could decide if we want to move it to the head of the list or not. Or where in the list we're going to put this in terms of working on it. I mean, you heard that Al feels he has 2 months, so this one actually has a much tighter clock on it than most of the others do. So is everyone okay with
I think, yeah.
working on this one?
I think we should. I don't think that we're that far off of what's here myself.
I am, I just need a bit of clarification on things, I think, as we
That-
discuss it more, yeah.
That's, exactly, yes. And as was pointed out, this isn't perfect. I mean, all this stuff was, a lot of it was completely rewritten during our last working session, so, and it shows with some of the, because when I was reading it, a lot of the stuff you guys were pointing out caught my eye as being, that's a little like, what's it, huh? While you were talking with Alan, I did a quick search of the federal sites, and the feds punt on defining what is a full-time student.
Well, the IRS does.
The IRS doesn't. It's very
No, they
clear.
don't. They punt too, because their definitions say, well, IRS says you have to be going
There's so many credit hours you have.
within 5. No.
Well, it's the school.
They say it's the school.
Yeah, they
It's
defer
full-time
to
is
the school.
dependent on the
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
So there is no hard federal law that says it's X amount of time. You have to go to UNH and say, what is UNH's policy? And that's the one we're going to have to
We
draw
could
from.
just- Yeah, that's easy.
So I'm just saying with regards to our comment to federal law, we're probably going to want to refer instead to whatever it is that UNH does.
We probably want to reflect an actual number then, or an actual explanation there, rather than just,
Yeah, I think UNH is 12, but I'm that,
So to
don't know
answer
where I'm
your,
drawing that piece of information from.
to answer your question about should we work on it, I think we should, and we're not going to solve it tonight, right?
No.
But, well, I think we should move this up, especially if the timeline of 2 months really becomes
Yeah.
a squirrel show. That would not be fun.
Well, we should at least point out what we want to try to tighten up on this. So I think tightening up the definition a little bit so that it's clear as to what kind of
What it is.
undergraduate college students we're looking at, which is,
Full-time, whatever that is.
you know,
full-time undergraduate.
Well, maybe that's something that, would it be worth asking our attorney that? Because on the flip side, I might be wary of kind of singling out UNH students. And so maybe the attorney would have good advice, like, can we refer to something as loose as, you know,
Federal.
a full-time
as
student.
more full-time or full-time undergraduate college students as defined by the IRS, for example.
Yeah,
I mean,
we could try that.
but maybe the attorney would have the best suggestion for what would or would not fly there.
I think also, so for me, the two main things is, yeah, so the 5 or more, I guess he went over it a little bit. I'm just still a bit iffy on that, but he said like maximum 14 or something. So I guess the fire code does cover that, is my understanding right now. And then community college students, they're considered undergraduate,
They're undergraduates, yeah.
right? So, but I
If
feel
they're
like, because
full-time.
I went to community college and I felt like there's typically no dormitories and most people were commuters and I don't know, it just, I always had a sense that there were a lot of people that were working full-time and they were just trying their best to get some education on the side. So
Different.
are they part of this or not, given that we have Great Bay relatively close? Is that something that we want to talk about? Or how much is like too much permutations? Because I think also that's, like, I want to try to avoid rabbit holes in this case, but that's one thing I was curious about.
So,
I think it just says undergraduate college student though, so that could be,
it would,
would be considered undergraduate to be.
that's where the whole point of, keep in mind, you have the 5 or more full-time students, right? Your typical, your typical community college student is living at home, or
They might have their
or
own
worker
apartment.
on their own.
They might have
They're
their own
not-
apartment.
Many cases, they just want to save
Right,
the
but they're not
tuition.
living with 5 other students.
Well, they're,
Going to the community
they're
college.
oftentimes not full-time, and someone who's,
Right.
Living
So
on their
I don't
own.
see that
right.
It's a different situation.
concern
Full-time student.
as being something we're likely to see. Because
They wouldn't be living in Durham. let's put it
it's
that
much
way.
more likely in that scenario Yeah, they might all be going to community college, but I doubt they're all going to community college full-time and working full-time.
So are we inserting the word full-time somewhere in the definition?
I think we should.
Where it doesn't exist?
Yes.
So is it 5 or more full-time undergraduate college students?
Yes.
Between
Yes.
the word more and undergraduate?
Yes.
All right, so we're making some progress. Full-time.
To me, one of the things I think we need to work on is the cap. How do we define the cap? If it only costs you 50 grand to sprinkle a building and you can pack 10 people in there, even with floor space, I think that changes the economics super fast for somebody, and that strikes me as very different than the buffer we have right now and the control that we have right now.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm missing- maybe I'm-
Would the fire code just cover that by itself?
Well,
Yeah,
we
but
should
fire
put it in
code,
here, though.
the way I
We should add
understood
it
Al
in.
saying was fire code says above 5 sprinkler, okay, great. And then, yeah, you do have egress pass and all those kind of things, but I think we're all of a sudden potentially saying there's a student rental building that can drop down on maybe as many as 10 properties that I can kind of see right in PO that I'm not sure people are ready to have that
I
happen.
mean, is that so bad, though?
I don't think it's bad
mean,
if it was
I know we don't
workforce.
like student housing,
No, my
but I'm just
cons-
wondering what's the problem with
Well,
that? If the fire
Well-
code says it's okay.
Yeah,
Because
well,
in
I'll
the-
address that specifically. I've lived in those neighborhoods, and then if you don't have a control, you are setting up a community dynamic that's going to result in hate and discontent, because I've lived it before. And if you, there's just a lot of disconnect between a family lifestyle that's in all these buffer neighborhoods and the student. It's very specific and it's very real, and it's why the 3 unrelated ordinance exists, because that was the instrument that they stopped that behavior from happening. It's very real.
I mean, you do, as Al said, you do have nuisance codes.
They're not enforced
And the town
practically.
administrator would stand behind, we have them in place in Durham, and they don't work to improve the dynamic. They're passed, but what it ends up needing then is we have to hire a lot more police officers to enforce them, which puts property taxes up higher. It creates a hostile environment in the community that no one is happy living under. And we do have a history in Durham of, for example, couches being moved out into the middle of the street and set on fire. And so if you have large numbers of people crammed into one house, those tend to become the party houses. And so that is why it's moved towards a dynamic of professional management or fraternities where there is also some adult supervision on site. And so even if there's only a handful of those houses, that can still put a significant strain on fire and police resources. It can put a significant strain on the community relationship. And even though those nuisance ordinances exist and we have them, the dynamic of one neighbor calling the police all the time on the other neighbor is just not pleasant for anyone.
Well, plus it's just logical. You have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, it's 1,500 square feet. I mean, there's got to be, we put bunk beds in all of them, throw her in a room, but in general, there's got to be a max of something.
Yeah,
But it should be related to space.
my concern is that we will have, I don't want to create a situation where a landlord feels that they can create cramped spaces and create lots of small, which I would consider unhealthy and lack of, well, let me just finish, a lower quality living spaces. And that's my
What I've been hearing from all of you is that what you really want, nobody said it yet, is once we hit a certain threshold, we want an on-site manager.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
What we're saying is
No,
that.
but that's the answer to what you're complaining about.
No, I'm just saying, no, it's not the
No,
answer.
if they have to hire somebody to
I'm
to
not
live
saying
on
that.
site.
And I don't think,
What I'm
I
saying
think that's.
from my
well, I'm
perspective,
going to put that out as a,
I don't think that's necessary. I just think that we should have we should be, if the fire code says 200 square feet we should state as per fire code, but then maybe state it, the numbers there. We want to state a limit as to how many people per square feet. We want to make sure that it is safe and healthy for these people to live in this. But, you know, I don't think a on-site property manager is necessarily needed. However, I wonder if there's a way of having better access to the owners of the properties than we have now.
Better access to what?
The owners of
The
the
owners.
properties.
Suggestion. The owner, manager, and/or agent of the student rental shall secure an annual license from the town in accordance with Chapter XYZ of the Durham Township Code of Ordinances.
That one's not allowed in Durham,
Why not?
Why not?
because the town made an agreement like 20 years ago with the property,
Durham Landlords Association.
Durham Landlords
Yeah.
Associations, there'd be no registration.
For how long? Saying that-
Apparently in perpetuity.
It's hard for me to believe that.
That's-
In my mind, I understand like 3 unrelated. At this point, it seems to be dated. When I moved to Durham, it was something that maybe I wasn't a huge fan of. But to go from, my concern is that to go from that to an anthill, that's what I'm concerned about. Is like limiting before it gets like too crazy. It's like there's got to be something in between where it doesn't seem like overwhelming to the point that we had to hire more police officers. Right? There's got to be something before that. So not necessarily a manager, but can we limit going back to this? That's why I was surprised that all of this was crossed out when it comes to the amount of space and things like that. So
Yeah,
that's what I'm
yeah.
thinking.
Having the amount per person. And then maybe, I mean, I get the nuisance thing, and because it's not just college students that are nuisance. When I lived in California, I had a very loud neighbor, and is very loud on Sundays, and to the point where during the day, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I could feel the vibration of their music in my own house. And the police wouldn't touch it until 10 p.m. And so so there is probably more meat that needs to be added to the nuisance ordinance. But I don't really think you're going to get a party house out of the suggestion that they have here. I think this is a reasonable suggestion.
I got my finger up here for a reason, okay? There's a gentleman in the audience who'd really like to address us, and I know we don't have a public hearing, but would we like to hear from you?
Sure.
Yes.
If you'd want to say something at the podium?
Mad that didn't come. I just think that,
If it's inappropriate, then maybe you should.
well, I
take a
just
vote on
worry
it.
that you're allowing them and other people from the public are going to say, why did you do that?
I think it's
Just my-
appropriate because I think there's the people up here that really, I don't understand what we're discussing. So if it's appropriate, I will speak. If not, I won't.
I've just brought it
I'd
up.
like to hear it.
Agreed.
Would anyone else object to it?
More
Rob?
dialogue, the better, I think.
I'm fine here.
My name is Mark Henderson. I live in Durham. I'm a local landlord in town. And I've been listening to the planning board for years, and there was a student housing issue and behavior issue years ago. I don't think there is anymore. And it's been well documented, the 3 unrelated, the disorderly house ordinance. A lot of this stuff came in. It wasn't really enforced, but it woke a lot of people up. It changed a lot of things. I don't know that we have the problems. And yes, there are certain problems. But right now, the student housing in Durham, we're about to die and be strapped for the next 5 to 10 years. And we will be approaching the town for abatements because the numbers are down, the money is down, the students are down. And so I sit here and listen to what I don't really understand where you're going with this because it's not really affecting anything. We're actually going the opposite way. The numbers are down now. They're going to be down next year. They're down for the next 5 years. So if you take it outside of the central business district, where you may have a handful of issues, deal with them under your current zoning. And if you go to 5 unrelated, Well, that's going to help some people because they'll go to 4. And if you want to label them undergraduate students, I think you're going to be in a nightmare situation in a court of law. Just leave it at 3 or put it at 4. But the reality is deal with the problems that you may have, which I don't know where they are, and then maybe try to think about how we can make this town better, because we all, landlords, will be coming to the town with abatements because we are not realizing the numbers that we are taxed on currently, especially with the most recent tax. And it's a scary situation for all of us with downtown, Tide Place, everything vacant downtown, and all we're doing is going and restricting more. I think this planning board, along with the town council, should look at things differently and say, what can we do to make this better rather than so adhesive where it's not super friendly. And what you've been talking about tonight affects me 0. I don't have any properties that will be affected by what you're talking about. I can't even believe that we're spending this meeting on this. I'm not sure why. Yes, Al Holland has something that's coming in 2 months and everything's changing in the world. It is. But maybe we just deal with it. 10 years ago,
But that's what we're
disordered
doing,
house.
Mark.
That's what we're trying.
That's what we're trying to do here. Is trying to deal with it. And
How?
what we can't
How?
do though, is get more students or student renters into your apartments or anyone else's.
Well, you can, and you're the planning board, and you can start changing zoning and things that help downtown businesses, not just student housing, businesses, zoning, variances, a car wash. You know, I mean, again, we can go in many different directions, Richard, and I get it, what you're saying, and I appreciate everything you said prior to me getting here. But the reality is we're going the wrong direction right now. Newmarket is better than Durham. Dover is better than Durham. Our Main Street is suffering. And we're here talking about who knows what over 3 and 4 unrelated and problems and trying to label people as graduate, undergraduate, full-time students. Like, give me a break. All I look at is like, I've got rentals that are half a student, non-student, not a person, an animal. We've got so much going on right now. You guys are going to label somebody an undergraduate student full-time? Good luck. Good luck. I'm in a nightmare as a landlord with parents. Just be careful how you go. I don't know if it's 3 or 4. I don't think it's an issue these days. I think there's bigger issues right now.
Thank you.
And I don't mean to silence everyone, but 3, 4, whatever it is, who cares? Let's look at everything. I mean, Michael just sent out a thing, and I think a lot of people jumped on board with your recent email. We're so excited to say Durham Main Street needs a revitalization. What can we do? As a landlord, I know I need to lower my rents, but to lower my rents, I have to have X, Y, and Z happen. My insurance rates are outrageous. My property taxes are outrageous. You know, I don't even take into consider financing. It's just my personal situation. You as a planning board, me as a citizen of this community, the town council, what can we do to make Durham more vibrant? I don't think it's a parking issue. I think it's bigger. I don't think it's a 3 or 4 unrelated. I think it's bigger.
And I would add that one of the things that we're trying to do is to create more housing that is non-student centered and or non-single family. And the problem that we always come up with that is, oh, you build, you know, a regular apartment building like you see everywhere else in the country, they're just going to be taken up by students. So we're having to fight a community that doesn't want more student housing or their communities, their neighborhoods taken up by students. But at the same time, we need that non-student population of people to live here that are shopping downtown and bringing their economic value to the town. We're missing an entire demographic of people. And I think that this is why we have had to look at this and start to reevaluate what that rule is, because that's the question, that's the wall we hit all the time, and we've worked at trying to overcome that but we have to be sensitive to it in this town, or it won't get approved.
Well, 30 years here, I will tell you, there's not a better time for this town to approach developers. No one should be building student housing in this town, in Keene, in Plymouth, any town for the next 5 to 10 years. I wouldn't buy 10 beds if you gave them to me. It's just not the time. So maybe this is the time. Find the district, rezone it, make it happen, whatever it is, but it's just not the time. Student housing, our numbers, the 5th grade class is the smallest Oyster River Middle School's ever had. 7 years from now, they'll be here. So that's the reality. So Sally, do what this board needs to do, but maybe it's not student housing. That's the least intimidating thing I think the planning board should be dealing with right now. And we've dealt with so much in the last 20 years. I get it. I'm part of it. And I think we've solved it in a good way and a bad way. The student housing went from faculty neighborhood to 3 or 4 amazing developments in town with good tax dollars, non-problem properties, professionally managed. And we're here talking about 3 versus 4? I just don't understand.
I think
There's still-
I'm somewhat new to this, but I think this is an issue that's been kind of coming down the road for a long time. I think a lot of us recognize that it needed to be addressed, and I think this is putting a little impetus to address that. I agree, it's probably not the most pressing issue that we have, sympathetic to that, but I think it's one of those things that we need to address, we'll address. My sense is that coming out of the planning board, at least our job might be somewhat easy. It'll be the public comment that will be challenging, is my sense. Might be wrong on that, but
Yeah.
that's all I'll say.
Thank you for your insights.
I appreciate it. And I
No,
thank you.
they are valuable, and we do get it, but we have to deal with a nugget.
All right, so we tweaked the definition. Anybody have an issue with the table of uses?
I mean, when I look, that the development, and I'm also sympathetic to, I don't think we're gonna have a lot of additional student housing built. But when I see professional, to your point of why have it impacting neighborhoods, the Orly development seems like a model development. Why wouldn't you have it out in Orly, and why wouldn't you have it in Moondor? They're just located spot next to the university. I'm all for developing downtown, but when I look at that, my immediate things that jumped out were, Orly and Moondor. Why not? Why wouldn't you have it there?
Put it in the
I think
workforce
that
housing overlays.
We don't want
that
it.
given the timing of this, and also just how things work in Durham, so when we did the solar ordinance, right, we first created a pretty conservative ordinance, and then over time, we've added some expansions to it in this past year where we realized things didn't work. And right now, I think the idea of adopting this might be to pass something that is going to work instead of having the 3 unrelated, but that is not really changing anything on the ground right now. And then if we want to change things on the ground, we could look at expanding those definitions in the future. But I think for the time being, it might make the most sense to just kind of recreate what we already have and not be expanding uses beyond the way that things are currently used at this time. And then once the structure is in place, we can revisit a student housing ordinance next year and have those sorts of debates.
If I could just add to that, my concern with that area is that if we are trying to also at the same time develop, attainable, affordable, attainable, even any type of housing that is not student focused. And I get what Mr. Henderson is saying. Unfortunately, in Durham, we have to distinguish between student focused and non-student focused because the community will force it in our face. But those areas, those commercial areas are great places to put housing. And I don't want to have to come up against, in trying to pass that, I'm trying to avoid coming up against a community saying, well, what would to stop that from becoming a student housing complex? And the reality is, as Mr. Henderson put, I don't think anybody's going to be building a student housing, but they will be building housing and they don't want to be taken over by students. And I get the frustration, but those are ideal places for that kind of housing.
For which kind of housing?
For a workforce housing,
Okay.
attainable housing, non-student focused,
All right.
any non-student focused housing.
And I'm just going to, just because we're sort of touching on this, we're defining student housing, we're defining affordable housing, we've got an over 55 housing, we've got a lot of definitions of who can live where. It seems that fundamentally you need housing, and then you need to allow people to make their decisions. So I'm not going to say that we confuse everything by segmenting things so carefully, but I think we confuse everything. Fundamentally, you need housing. If you want and if students want to live next to someone that's over 55, and they want to live next to some other people, and you add housing and prices go down, that seems like everyone can make their own decisions. So at some level, I get a little frustrated that we're cross-segmenting everyone, and then we've got this missing middle, and then we've got all this stuff, and you come out and you end up with everyone split apart, and over 55 living nowhere near downtown, and now we want them to live closer to downtown. And then, what are we going to do with student housing? I'm fine with the definition. I think we should allow it in other areas. We can sort of cut around this on the edges, but,
What do other people think about Moodor Orly?
I'd rather just leave it the way it is. That's my opinion. But I think you're right about if we had density in our zoning by lot, as we define it in each of the things, we wouldn't have the fact that nobody will build anything but an over 55 because they need the density, right? Workforce housing didn't even meet the senior density until we're working to change that.
Yeah.
So I agree people should be able to do this kind of stuff, but what we have is a lot of existing homes and a lot of student housing, and we need to now kind of tweak some of these things, and like you said, maybe down the road, we'll have more affordability for everybody, but you're not going to get that when you've got half-acre lots, 1 acre, 2 acre, 3 acres, that are all the only thing we can get right now.
And we want to build non-defined housing. We want to build housing, and anybody can live there, anybody. And the reality is a 2-bedroom apartment is going to naturally define how many people are living in it, because you're not going to have, 15 students in there. But that's what we want to build, and that's where I could see we could take advantage in those districts. But I think really this whole definition, I think you're really looking at those single-family homes that are really being used for rental. And I think more than the big, commercial units that are there, Madbury Commons and that but it's the single-family homes that are going to be, that are the threat to, and I'm not saying it's a real, but a perceived threat to neighborhoods that would be filled up with students. And I think that's what we're really trying to hone in on. I don't think anybody's going to build student housing. It's past its day. Even over 55 is going, past its day. I think regular old housing.
So was that an answer to the Orly Moodor question that I'm
I don't
missing?
want to see, I would rather not see it there, though. I'd rather not see it there.
Thanks.
I mean, there may be other ways to think about this as well, which is like with our short-term rental policy, we require owner occupancy. So to Paul's points, we could also think about student housing and saying we define student housing, and if you have student housing, you either have to have owner occupancy or have to have professional management on site. That may be a way of doing that doesn't put a limit on, doesn't limit density. You could go as dense as you want, but it does put some of that, additional responsibility as a property owner baked into that equation.
But the word you used was student housing. You mean student rental, or are we talking about?
Sorry, so student yes, I mean,
A single-family home.
definition of student rental, if we don't want to put, kind of a square foot requirement on it in terms of a maximum, or if we don't want to limit where it goes in town, perhaps another way of addressing some of these concerns would be to say that, you know, this is what a student rental is, 5 or more, or 4 or more, whatever it is. You know, college students living together, and it requires having owner occupancy or professional managed, or be professionally managed with staff on site.
That's gonna raise the price.
I'm not really,
That's gonna just raise the price.
yeah.
Well, I mean, we tend to see that the larger developments in town all do have
Yeah, but in
their
a house.
professionally
There's
staffed.
plenty
Yeah,
of,
but in a house?
Well,
but
But that's,
they are sometimes owner occupied. We see that in our neighborhoods currently.
that's student home. I mean, maybe that's our real concern, all right? Because
Yeah.
we don't have
I-
a problem at these big developments.
No.
It's the isolated problems that are in rental homes. So maybe we're tackling this the wrong way, and we should be looking at a student home, which is a single residential dwelling unit rented to students.
Right, well, I would say if they're owner occupied, you tend to not see a problem if it's an owner renting out an ADU or an owner renting
Well,
a property that they,
there'd be a way
then
around
they're not a
that,
student
though.
rental.
But they could have, that could become an issue on the fact that people still do it today. It's an old thing. Buy the house and put your kid and a bunch of his friends in it.
then the owners would not be, they would not be living
If you put it in
outside.
Sure
your
they are.
kid, yeah, you put it in your
Because they
kid's
put one of
name.
their sons on the deed.
You put it in your kid's
Or
name.
daughter.
The house I bought when I first moved to town was that way. I was buying it from the kid who was graduating.
Put it in their name and
I guess
that's
if the
owner
kids
occupied.
is on the deed, then that may be, I don't
I think
know.
we just need to
Yeah,
look at
well,
the capacity.
I think that's adding a lot of complexity we don't need, to be honest. The note number 4 conflicts
Yeah, what's
with the definition.
I was wondering about that because I couldn't quite
Yeah, I
understand
actually
it.
can't
Wasn't,
I don't understand it. I've read it
So
3 times.
I think the definition got reworded to try to be, and we need to go back and
says student rentals are
put
allowed in any legal.
single family and
home or
duplex in the
zones shown
definition
above.
instead
But
of
it says including in zones. in
dwelling
districts.
units, because dwelling units includes every apartment building.
I kind of think note 4, maybe, that to me read more like notes for you, Michael, for you to understand and remind yourself how the ordinance operates. I don't know that that needs to be included at all, because I think if I own a single-family home in one of these districts, I know it's a single-family home and I know it's in this district, and it will still say, you know, it's a permitted. If I see that student rental is a permitted use and the building I own happens to be in, you know, one of the zones where single-family homes is not an allowed use, I think I would come to you if I had further questions, but I know what my existing building is and I can see that student rental is permitted. I think it's just
Where that
creates
note
confusion.
came from,
You're probably right.
so where that note came from was, remember, the prior version of the student rental definition was a lot more complex, and this was helping, I think, clarify it. But now that we went to this simpler version, what we really need to do is take the legal single-family residence or duplex residence part and put that in here instead of this residential dwelling composed of one or more dwelling units.
So you're saying we don't need note number 4, but somehow combine that with the definition there?
Just the whole idea that the student rental definition includes
Dwelling.
everything.
You don't want
There's
residential
no
dwelling.
restriction here in terms of the size of the unit, whereas if the intent is really to be single-family duplexes, then that should be in the definition, not in the note.
Right. Yeah, I think Em's probably right, that note 4 really serves more as a administrative clarification, which a reasonable reading of the ordinance, we know what to do with it. And
Yeah.
I think the intent of that, what that is saying therefore, is student rental refers to the occupancy of one or more dwelling units, as opposed to single-family, duplex, multifamily is the kind of structure. So if student rental is allowed in a particular zone, then it's allowed in any structure that's allowed in that zone.
Okay.
Right? So I think
Yeah.
we can eliminate, I think we can delete note 4. I think we know what is
All right.
intended.
Yeah, yeah, you don't need to go for it. So this would literally say, if you have a single-family home, if I have a single-family home, I can't turn it into a student rental.
You can if student rental's allowed in that zone.
What if I live in B?
If you live in
Then-
B,
then
then
you
you
I
cannot.
can't, okay.
because you're an X in
But I
B.
can if I'm in Coe's Corner
No.
or
If you're in,
If you-
Oh,
if
not
you're in-
Coast
If you're in
Corner.
PO.
a Courthouse, Churchill, PO,
But anybody that's already
and CB.
renting their home in
Just
the residential
non-compliant.
areas is
they'd be
grandfathered.
grandfathered.
As long as they stay in that condition, they
But they sell it, the
They
next
sell it,
person
and then
No,
somebody...
selling doesn't affect
doesn't affect.
grandfather, vested.
Well, what if they sell it and it's turned into a single-family home?
Well, that's a different.
Then it's different, so it can't revert back.
Right.
And if I'm in a residential neighborhood and I'm renting a single residential dwelling unit to a group of 3, or dare I say 4 students, it's not a student rental by this definition.
No, it's not until
It's
it's
not.
5, yeah.
I think,
Okay.
let's, yeah, maybe kind of finish on the student rental, and then I want clarification on what happens in the rest of the zones, because I think as we heard, like, there's a big conversation about student housing. I know it's a very hot topic right now, but it seems like the demand within the next couple of years is going to go down. However, just a general affordable housing, AKA in the other zones, as well, as a big factor, I think. So that's something that I want to discuss. Just let me know when we're ready, when we're done with the student rental part.
You mean tonight?
It's a big picture.
Okay.
Can I ask Michael one question?
Go ahead.
Let's just say that, so I'm in rural C, and I just wanted to rent.
In residency?
Residency, and I just wanted to rent my house to 4 people. Would I be allowed to do that?
Yeah. Under this proposal, you could rent to any 4 people.
Right.
As long as, yeah, and what about if they're not college students? I could rent to 5.
You could rent to, yeah, if they're not, you could rent
Well,
to anybody
so the
except
fire-
for 5 or more full-time undergraduate college students, outside of the 4 zones.
Your fire
But you
code?
might run across fire code issues.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay?
But if you had 5 bedrooms, because the fire code would
So-
still be by square
That's why
footage,
you're
right?
wondering.
No. This is why you have to go and read the fire code. Because the fire code uses terminology we're not familiar with. The fire code says if you have X number of outsiders, I think it's more than 3 outsiders, so they consider the family units, any family unit
It's
is
different.
1.
Right, okay.
Doesn't matter how many people it
It's-
is.
it's-
So you can rent to a couple of
family with
brothers. That's
15
only counts as 1.
They're related.
Right? So you could technically rent to 8 if it's 4 sets of twins. That would be only considered 4.
That's like our related
And-
unit.
But if you go over that, you need a sprinkler system.
So what's our plan for tonight, for the rest of the night, as far as chatting on this? Are we going
I
to
think
circle
we
back
should
on this after Michael
look at it later.
modifies?
So we were talking, there was a question about general dimensional standards and square footage and, if we want something greater than what the fire code has, which is what the rule yardstick for safety is the fire code. If you want something stricter than that, then you'd have to put it into general dimensional standards.
I think
If you're going to be content with the fire code,
Fire code's fine.
then we don't have to do anything. Heather?
Well, I think that's the best way to do it. And when you get right down to it, there's not many people that are going to want to bunk, 4 in a room. Let's face it. I mean, even desperate students probably aren't going to do that. But I think it just should say, I think it should just point to it.
Yeah.
Because you're saying we let that rule, but I think it would just be good to note that here.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the only thing I have. So
Right.
to me, that and, maybe the question of parking. Right now, you can only have 3 cars in your
So I
driveway.
would anticipate some pushback from residents on that because thinking back to the way that Mill Plaza development was examined and discussed, when Colonial Durham first came with well, it had various iterations, but one of its plans, it wanted to put student housing in quite densely at 200, maybe it was 250 square feet per resident, and there was pushback around that density downtown, because one of the feelings is that if downtown becomes entirely a student housing kind of complex, that also kills downtown because students have limited revenue, and so they're not spending as much per resident downtown as, say, other age demographics would be. And so if there were if the minimum square foot per occupant for student housing was 200 square feet, I think we may hear residents coming forward saying, when we had the whole discussion around Colonial Durham, we changed that to, I think it was 350 square feet very intentionally, because there is this concern of making sure, in part, to encourage kind of other types of housing that's not just geared towards students, but also with this idea that as student housing, there's less demand for that. We want these properties to be able to transition, and if people are packed that densely in there, they're not going to be attractive to other demographics. So there was a very intentional discussion in which the town actually raised the square footage for student housing up to 350, I believe it was. But I think we should be cognizant of that discussion and that rationale before we go to a public hearing with this.
Can I just make 2 comments? And one is related to any change that we might make, and it's more of a process change. When I read other towns' zoning, when they make changes in the zoning ordinance itself, there's, in a lot of cases, a link back to what was just redacted or changed. This will be another push, for I find it very, very difficult for me to roll back all of the levers that were adjusted over the years to make changes. I have to dig and I have to pour through, and so my ask would be that in the zoning ordinance itself, as we make changes, we provide a link to the previous language so that if someone wants to roll back, like me, and understand what changed, I could go back just like I would look in code, and I could say, oh, there was a change history, there's a version change here, this is what used to be there, and then this was the change. So that's just an ask, as a process about how we make the information publicly available.
I think that is something I've seen as well, but we know that that's going to need, I don't even know if you could get a student to do it, but that would require the full reconfiguration. And
I mean,
think
put it on
we've got to
GitHub.
start somewhere. But
The rest, I'm not complaining, I'm just saying it's part of my day-to-day life. I look at version histories of stuff, and a lot of it. And it's very helpful because I can go back and I can see the change. As I'm trying to understand the changes that were made here, it's really difficult to tease out that there was a 350 square foot change that was made that throttled it when you want to then undo that. So
It went to 300.
I thought it even went
so
to
that's
600.
the other is that what are the levers that we're going to
300 per
change?
person.
And I guess when you look at, Mill Pond, it's quite possible that will never change in my lifetime. So it depends on how one views that, whether that was what the outcome happened right there. But it's
Talking
quite
about
possible
Plaza.
that, yeah,
Yeah.
that in my lifetime it will look very similar to the way it looks.
Here, yeah, it's not
So,
gonna change anytime soon.
I hear you on that, but
I think Portsmouth I know does that, so
does
that might be a
Dover,
good
right?
example.
You see a whole bunch of them in their front page will have you know.
And right in the
There's a lot
area
of
that changed
formatting.
itself, you can just click and you're like, boom, okay, this is
Yeah.
when it was changed and this was the change. And then if you want to back it out, because you can see waves coming through here. And, you know, then all of a sudden you want to revert back to that wave. You know, what does that mean?
You mean that's a live link in the document?
Yeah, you
online?
can do that.
Yeah. I mean, in code, we do it every day. In code, you look at some area and you can see the version history and you can see all the code changes that were made there. In other places, it would be, okay, this ordinance changed. This is the way it used to look before that change. It
You know
takes a
how-
little bit of work.
You know how like when, in James Bubar's things, he has the sidebar?
Right.
There'd be a link, the sidebar would have the little link saying previous version.
Previous language of that area.
Could be a project for an intern.
It would be a terrific project for an intern or just something, just moving forward, just to get us in a place where
Yeah,
it's
at some
easier to
point you just have to
understand.
start doing it and then it grows
Yeah.
on itself.
But, so I don't know all those changes that were made to do that.
What did you say, Sally? 'Cause I thought it was at one point it was at 600.
When we
At one
changed,
point it was at 600 and
it
it went to
was
400.
300 per half
And
person.
if you look at what we're taking out,
Half person.
there, depending on where,
Yeah.
there's 3 different rules depending on where and what you're doing in the central business district.
Okay, so when that's, we just need a number or we need a reference, but something, I think that's all we're saying.
Well,
So-
so you could keep the habitable area, minimum habitable, either refer to the fire department,
Just
which
take
I
the
think is
fire
200.
code.
Or you could have your own minimum habitable area of
Yeah.
250 or 300
No,
for student housing per occupant.
I would just go
Or
with the
just-
fire code. Senior housing is 200.
Yeah, so,
Senior housing,
Just say
although most
that in
senior housing is
references.
related households, even I guess we have it in.
I don't care if they're related or any, that whole
Well, but
related.
that whole chart is just for unrelated.
I know.
So
but-
We're trying to
doesn't-
simplify everything long-term as well, right? So
All right,
let's,
so just refer to the fire.
let's
code.
do simple.
I agree. I vote
Fire
fire
code.
code.
fire code.
Yeah.
I think Peyton had a second point, and then I would like to say something after that if possible.
What's
Did
that?
you say that you had 2 comments?
One was that we track
document?
the changes.
It's okay.
You
It'll
got
come
that
to you.
one?
I might just stay with one.
All right, sounds good. So,
Well, but you do know we have it, at least at the end of it, Karen keeps an index of all that.
Yeah, but it should, you know,
about that,
most
right?
people
It-
have
it's
theirs
very
literally at least a
difficult.
list that says date, paragraph change.
Even looking at the
Well, it does have that
downtown,
at the end.
Yeah,
I'm not
but
sure if
that
it's
doesn't
a
help
live link.
when you're online because often you're looking at just a chapter.
yeah,
You don't
it's,
have the whole document.
Can we assign this to a committee to figure this?
Yeah, let's
to get
go.
a topic
Come
out?
on.
Our technology committee.
Erica?
I want to go back to the conversation just real quick because I love it how this is 2 pages, but I feel like it's massive. The first thing is
It's
crossing
not.
out household, family, and unrelated household. So the example that you gave of, what was it, 4 twins? It has to be that way, but we're crossing out family and unrelated household. So how does that affect?
we're not defining what a family
I'm
is.
saying, I was telling you what how the fire code handles it,
Okay,
okay? Which has nothing to do with our zoning.
so what does crossing out do?
Oh,
We're not-
crossing out, it takes it, we're not using these definitions anymore, so we're taking it out.
We're not going to define what a family is.
Okay, I feel like that's a big deal.
Because the reason we were defining a family is because we had to define.
Because we're
Unrelated.
prudes. The reason we're defining families is because we're prudes.
Well, I think there's
was
a
an
legal
unrelated.
argument that traditionally, by establishing a zoning that is single-family residence, all of those zoning areas define family. And some lawyers would tell you that you need a definition of family in order to have a zoning area called a single-family zoning. So I think that's something that I would feel most comfortable if we ran that by our lawyer, that it's fine to get
Seems
rid of
like
a
you could just use
definition.
single
Todd,
dwelling
we
instead.
did.
You did run it by the
Todd
lawyer?
Get rid
sent you a
Okay.
note today.
Okay.
Okay.
Call it dwelling.
I think we should.
So in the case of, that we were discussing a single-family house, just for my understanding, if we had like the square footage that supported the number of people, they don't actually have to be related anymore.
The whole
As
idea
the
with
old
it.
family definition would state.
That is
Yeah.
being removed, yeah, the whole idea of whether or not you're related to someone or not that you're living with is leaving zoning. It's still,
Okay, so I think that's actually big progress, because when it comes to providing housing for workforce and things like that, like, you do have people that they want to have roommates and things like that, so, okay. Thank you for clarifying, I was just a bit confused about that.
But it's true, and where we have our headers on our principal uses, we say single family, it could just say single dwelling.
It
Well,
should say,
yeah, but single family, that's the conventional term, is single family
Yeah, but you know,
residence.
you told me that about insisting that we keep family a couple of years ago too. So I'm just saying, is if somebody was concerned, it says family, you could just put single
there'll be
dwelling.
another word that will come
Yeah,
out in
something,
the
you know.
industry.
I'm just saying.
You don't call it a master bedroom anymore, either.
Yeah, that's right.
It is, the term is a little antiquated, it's still,
It
but
is-
it doesn't
antiquated.
mean family, that's just what it's called.
Well,
Whoever lives in
There we
that, if you're living in that house, you're all family.
yep, you're happy. All right, so then you were going to reference the fire code, and then is there anything else that we were going to do?
No, that's it. If we're doing fire code, then that's it. And just, the rest of it is just removing other sections that are referencing the three unrelated.
Do you want to bring this back for next week?
Yes.
Yeah, let's look at it again.
I don't want to see a clean draft before we move on. All right. Anything else on this?
No.
We move on? Okay. Item 12, Historic District Ordinance Zoning Amendment Purview of HDC, review of changes to Historic District Overlay District proposed by the Historic District Commission pertaining to purview for tree removal and minor structures. All right, this one's even simpler, it seems. It's on one page.
It's very simple, too.
Anybody have issues with it? Or shall we set a public hearing?
Set a public hearing.
Do they already have oversight over people's trees in the historic? Because it seems overreach.
Oh, no, they do, this would
Yeah,
make
they
it
do.
easier.
This is
Right
actually,
now,
they're
they-
giving up some, they're making it
Really?
This
easier.
is actually, yeah, they have purview over your trees.
HDC,
Well-
if you're in the HDC
I am
historic
so
zone,
glad
the
I
HDC
stumbled onto
never.
living in our.
Well, if you, it's any healthy tree, what is it, 8 inches? Or, I'm sorry, 8 inches?
12.
12 inches in diameter. So they have purview over the removal of any healthy tree 12 inches or greater in diameter, which is fine, except the process gets muddied because it's healthy tree. So somebody will call me and say, well, I've got a dead tree. So who makes the call? I mean, I can go say, well, yeah, it is dead, so you're not subject to review. Or what if it's dying or blighted? What we have, and now fortunately, our tree warden is actually, Rich Rain is a certified forester. So we have the skills on hand to make these determinations. So there's no need to go to the HDC. If it's dead, dying, or blighted, Rich can make that call.
Okay, so that's really what it's saying here?
Yeah, it's just simplifying the process.
Okay.
It's actually making it easier.
I do wonder, could we use maybe the same language that we put together in the draft of the wetland shoreline overlay district? Just, I think, where we can repeat language, it makes it more, it adds clarity and it gives people, I think, more faith in kind of transparency and fairness just by reusing the same language. And so I just wonder if we could copy that from
Which language are you
Which language?
referring to?
the language that we just kind of rewrote around this for the wetland shoreland overlay district, which is currently before Concom.
No,
No, this
because
is
it's two totally different purposes. In the wetland shoreline overlay district, it's all about how much you can remove and density and creating other stuff. That's not relevant here.
And the historic, the commission kind of went over this, and
Oh, yeah,
where
this is-
at the meeting, this language worked for them.
And the HCC only deals with it's only individual trees. Whereas in the wetland and shoreland, it could be a section
The
of trees.
SPOD is dealing with all trees that are greater than
6 inches at breast height.
Okay, I mean,
I,
if we cannot reuse the same language, it doesn't work, that's fine. I think it's just worth keeping in mind that wherever we can, I think it adds simplicity, adds clarity, and it makes, I think people feel more comfortable when things feel like
I agree with that.
there's continuity between things. It makes it feel like it's more fair and transparent in a way.
Yeah, in the historic district, it's a completely different dynamic, though.
So will somebody from the historic district
told them they
explain-
don't-
Will they explain that?
Oh,
at
I can,
public hearing?
I told them, don't bother coming, they have better things to do. I can explain it, and Sally can explain it, who's on the HTC.
Okay.
If you really want the chair to come, he'll come, but I told him,
No, I
Take the
wasn't
evening
even,
off.
I wasn't saying that. I was just saying
So
it's
I think this
someone.
makes total sense and
Yeah.
looks great.
It simplifies the process.
What did I say? I meant to, we should, did I say tree, healthy tree, what did I say?
Where?
Oh, excuse me. This is supposed to say, blah, blah, blah. Oh, in the first 7, removal of a healthy tree. It should just say a tree. Delete the word
A
healthy.
tree, yeah.
So, I mean, if this is acceptable, you can put it out for a public hearing.
Yeah.
And when would be a good date for that, Michael?
December 11th?
Okay. Do we need a motion on that, Mr. Chairman?
I don't think we do.
Okay. Everyone good with that, December 11th?
All right.
Now, we have the PUD, but we also have the PUD on next week's agenda, in case you want to.
Yeah, it's 10 after 9. We got 2 sets of minutes in the PUD.
We don't need to go over the PUD.
I feel
I agree.
burnt. So how do people feel about just delaying our discussion on the PUD until next meeting?
I suggest we delay it since we're going to do it.
Is there any update with the university? Could be, if there is, great. If there isn't, that's all we need to hear.
No.
Yeah.
It was added to this agenda only because this agenda was shorter because we pulled three
Yeah,
things
we
off.
threw it on originally because there was nothing on the agenda, then all this other stuff popped in. I do have one thing. Do you have any update on the new master plan from the university?
They are, I believe they're scheduling a public hearing on this within the next month or so. I'll have more information soon.
All right. Because that would be interesting. All right. Any other business? Anybody have other business for us? No?
You mean we're
Alright.
not gonna rejuvenate downtown tonight?
Nope,
Okay.
we should have a magic wand.
So the committee for looking at the downtown zoning is just scheduled a meeting for next week?
Next Wednesday.
Wednesday.
at 2.
Next Wednesday at 2, so they will hopefully get started on that. All right, review of minutes of September 25th.
Hayden, we'd love to have you there.
I'm
Your
gonna
schedule
try.
is tight. What?
I'm gonna try. but
If we
The only
made
thing
it
I
at
saw was,
lunchtime
I
every
think it's
time, would you be
Muddy
able to do
Pete,
it
right?
during-
Not
If you made
Muggy
it at
Pete.
noon every time, would it be something?
Muddy?
Lunch, or is your
Muddy
schedule?
Pete on line
Just
Wait a-
all over
25,
the place.
second page.
On which, the first one,
Customer
25th?
calls.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Michael,
what's
the
Muggy
question
Pete?
was, is the soil designation that Mr. Fogg was talking about, Stratford considers the soil MP or Muggy Pete? Is that Muddy Pete or Muggy Pete?
Is it, it's really not
It's a soil
substantive, is it?
definition, so.
Is it
I don't think
muddy?
it's,
I think it's muddy
Muddy
because
Pete's a good
muggy
bet.
refers to an
Could
atmospheric
you double check
condition.
that, please?
yeah.
Because I don't,
I'll clarify that.
That's a good catch,
with
because I
the,
didn't even read that.
okay. Anything else? So shall we hold these until we get the response on that?
Oh, I'll just correct that
Or
with
we'll-
the,
I don't think it's
With,
really
um,
even
yeah,
substantive.
With the what we can
Yeah.
approve with the clarification?
yeah, I'll just correct that.
All right, I'll move that we accept these minutes once the clarification for Muggy Pete has been determined.
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Abstain.
Abstain,
Abstain.
2 abstains,
I can't
And
locate the
you're-
minutes.
and
Well, she was.
you were.
So I was, you were.
you
I
were
was not
absent.
at
You
the
were-
25th.
So,
You were absent anyways.
and Heather was present, was a city member, so you get
You
to
were doing
vote.
baby stuff.
But only on the one.
Yes, on the 25th, so.
Okay, I thought you were combining the two.
No, I was
Okay.
just doing the 25th.
All right. Yes.
So we had 1, 2, 3,
Five.
4,
5.
5 with 2 abstentions. All right, and minutes for October 9th. And for this one, yeah. Robert and Richard were absent, and Tom was sitting in. All right. Or was he? Erica. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So it should be a 4.
No, we'll get a 5. We'll get a 5. Because Tom wasn't seated. Or,
Yeah,
no,
he was.
No, it's still
He had to
4-0,
have
right? You
seated.
can't have both council.
He was seated. 'cause he had a
Sally,
vote.
Peyton, me, Erica, and council. All right, so any changes for these minutes?
Nope.
Nope. I'll move that we accept them.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Abstain. Thank you. So that actually ends up being a,
It's 4-0, isn't it? Or can you have 2 council
well,
vote?
no, it's not. What it is
You wouldn't.
you guys who are absent shouldn't be voting, which whoever Erica was covering for shouldn't be voting, because Erica's voting for you. So it's 1 abstention. It's
2. Rob and I-
5, yeah, 5. It's weird, but yeah, 5-2. I mean, it's not
5-0.
both council.
Okay.
Yeah, 5-0-2. All right, that gets us through there. Take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.